My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you all here. Last talk of the semester. It's been a great run, and we'll be starting up again in the fall. And some of the slides going by, one of them is just to remind you that in September at some point, Tom Dietz will be here from Michigan State University, one of the leading human ecologists in the world, to give the Mitchell Lecture on sustainability, so that'll be real fun too. But we'll have a regular Monday at 3 o'clock group of talks coming up, and actually they're not all set yet, so if there's somebody you think would be wonderful to have here, feel free to check with me, let me or Ruth or somebody like that know. Thanks. So it's a great privilege and pleasure to welcome Matt Scott to the Mitchell Center today, not the least because he and Senator Mitchell go way, way, way back. In fact, I guess that's one of the things that I can say about Matt is he's one of these people who just were at the start of so many important things in Maine. It's really amazing. I was just talking to him a few minutes ago, and he reminded me he joined DEP. He was DEP long before it was DEP. He was the first biologist there, working with engineers and chemists. And I know there's chemists and engineers in the back row, Arya and Ivan, and I'm sure he had a good time working with you, but biologists sometimes have to learn to work with other folks and vice versa, so I bet that was a big adventure back then. He actually worked for state government for 38 years and left a big impact. He went on to serve as Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, past president of NALMS, the North American Lake Management Society. I didn't know he was the past president of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, which is an amazing organization. He's been at beekeeping for at least a half a century, maybe a few extra years now. And he's got a wonderful column at the Maine State Beekeepers Association website, and which, by the way, the tagline for that association is, "We love honeybees, you should too." I think that's really more what we need to go. At this point in our nation's history, I think more love is what we need, whether it's for honeybees or anybody else. And I say that because, let's face it, honeybees are immigrant bees. Am I right, Matt? They're immigrants. In fact, he had a wonderful column that I just got to read part of right before this of bears and bees. And again, in a message of how we need to learn to work together better. Bears and bees don't work together very well. Seemed to be the point of the article, as near as I could tell. So Matt founded the DEP Lakes Program in 1970 and VLMP, the Volunteer Lake Monitoring, in 1971. He was also on the VLMP Board of Directors for 3 years. He was on the Board of Environmental Protection in Maine. Just incredible roles. He was telling me about going back and forth to work with Senator Mitchell when Senator Mitchell was the Senate Majority Leader. So incredible history. That's actually one of the things that I think maybe we can benefit from today is that Matt's really spending a lot of time now trying to make sure we don't forget this history. And I'm a big believer in that. And after giving it a lot of thought, I've decided that what I want to be when I grow up, and there are a lot of people waiting to see when that's going to happen, is Matt Scott. So welcome, Matt.
This is a walking history show that I'm going to do. It's about the history of how bad water quality was in the state of Maine back in my early years and back in the time when I had the opportunity to try to do something about it.
So you don't have to sit here, but you'll be picked up a little better. Did they show you how to use this?
Yes.
Okay, so the one to the right, like 3 o'clock, is advancing it. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's good to see some of my older friends in the audience that are scientists that are still here, some retired, such as Cassie Gibbs, and the Aquatic entomology program that she developed here from Maine. Ivan's work. I don't know, is Ron Davis in the audience? No? Okay. All right, well, Ron Davis, my history of the state of Maine and the values that we have is all tied around these four resources right here. And you all know what they are. Maine is divided into some major river drainages, and we all live in a watershed. That happens to be the watershed I currently live in. It's the Belgrade Lakes watershed. So you all live in a watershed no matter where you are. And the early decades of my career started back in 1935. And Maine was recovering from the Great Depression. We had a really huge hurricane that hit the state of Maine in 1938 and had left it with devastating effects. I grew up in this watershed here. This is the Mattawamkeag. But it was probably one of the poorest locations in the state of Maine, up in the corner of Washington and Aroostook County. Water quality was at its worst. There was no treatment. There was no money. And we were always on the tail end of the stick, you might say, up here in the north. In fact, we're on the end of the exhaust pipe, too, when it comes to atmospheric deposition. So all of these things that were important, that ice cutting was a major source of income for people in Maine in the wintertime. It was a part-time seasonal job, but a very important industry. Often wondered how good that ice was because refrigeration wasn't in effect back in 35. So ice cutting was important, but I don't know how many people ate the ice or drank the water from the ice that melted. I often wondered about that, and I can't find any documentation of people becoming ill in New York City or in Connecticut, perhaps other states where all this ice went. But log driving was the feature of the time. Sawmills everywhere. Logs, the rivers were the conveyance machines for moving wood to the mills. And the Androscoggin, the Kennebec, and the Penobscot, and the Mattawamkeag, and all the tributaries served as conveyance for this wood to go to the mill work. Many of the dams that were built back in those days were low-head dams on the outlets of the lakes to use the freshet water in the spring to move that wood down the river. There's old remnants in the Allagash waterway of these old behemoths that worked as the logging, using steam-driven engines to move wood into the waterways. Now, Ashland was pretty popular for sawmill activity. There were sawmills everywhere in the state. Wherever there was water and wood could be stored, you'd find sawmills. And the result of that was sawdust going into the rivers and streams. There was no control of it whatsoever, along with potato waste in Aroostook County that went into streams. These are waste potatoes came out of the buildings after the winter storage. They were spoiling, couldn't be used for starch, and they ended up in our waterways. And starch plants where they could be used for starch were discharging the waste into the waterways at the same time. So things were really pretty bad. Open burning dumps everywhere. I remember the open burning dump in Orono when I was an undergraduate student at this university. It was common for people to have a dump site, burn the waste, and get rid of the solids as much as possible. People lived on the banks of streams in Maine, very common. Where did the waste go? It went into the local stream or into the river.
Do you know where that is?
This is up in the, this is on Presqu'île, there's a Presqu'île stream up in Aroostook County. This is another lower part of the stream where they used old automobile junks to, I think they were trying to control erosion of the banks there, David. I'm not sure. I never find the age of those vehicles, though, somewhere in the 60s. Well, after the war ended, and I was a student at MCI, going to high school there. That's where I decided to go to high school. My parents had to make a decision whether we'd go to a school called Freedom Academy, Newport High School, or in Waterville, but MCI was the closest, so that's where I ended up in school. However, that was in the Sebasticook drainage again, and the Sebasticook was pretty nasty. It was called the Nasty Sebasti, in fact. That got a nickname. It was the worst sub-drainage of the Kennebec River that we had in the state of Maine at that time. Anyways, from the town of Hartland, at the outlet of Great Moose Lake, all the way down to Pittsfield, Dexter, down through, and the two branches. But the biggest thing as far as going to this school that affected my future and what I was going to do was I had to write a report on game management or wildlife conservation, I called it back in those days, and these were the two references that I had. Lo and behold, when I became an undergraduate student at Orono, those became the textbooks that I had. So that's quite a connection, I thought. I'm going to back up here. At the end of this school year in 1953, I, like a lot of young men in Maine, received that draft notice. I was being inducted into the service for the Korean conflict. But we still had sawdust and sawmills and building activity that was going on after World War II. It was quite a booming business in Maine, and all these sawmills were really polluting an awful lot of our watersheds. Fish kills were occurring in the Maine rivers. Lots of fish kills, especially during the month of July and August. It was just common to see these fish. Every year I could expect that and get the calls to go out on a fish kill. And the Kennebec, the Androscoggin, Merrimating Bay, and this is a good example of a tannery in Heartland. The largest tannery in the state of Maine, by the way, is one the remnants of it is up in Howland, at the juncture of the Piscataquis River up there. And this one is at the outlet of Great Moose Pond up in Heartland. No treatment at all. Treatment wasn't even heard of. Sewage fungus was common. It really was bad. This is an area of the coast down in Belfast where we had two poultry companies down there. A fellow by the name of Frank Woodard, who was from this university. Frank did a lot of research work, he and Otis Sproul, on trying to help Maplewood and Penobscot control their waste. This is nothing but waste from chicken or poultry processing. Those are legs, those white pieces of leg bones that you see in the foreground there. Now, when the tide went fully out, the gulls would come in and harvest what they could, but the gulls didn't like the legs, the chicken legs, and they never bothered with those bones. Sort of interesting watching those birds moving back and forth each year I was down there. So I used the GI Bill, came to Orono, and I had three great mentors on this campus. W. Harry Everhart in fisheries, Horace Quick in wildlife, and Harold Young in forestry. And what they instilled in me as a young biologist was to think of the researchers on this campus and what they could do in the future as far as helping maintain or sustain our environment is to make it as good as it is, much better than what it was. So Silent Spring was published in '62. You probably historically knew about Rachel when she was doing that work. She was the editor of sport fisheries abstracts and wildlife abstracts at the Boothbay lab in Boothbay Harbor, and she passed away in 1964. However, her publication really trended us into what we were going to do in the future in keeping things clean. And the waste discharges were just so numerous to count. And she was reading all of these papers that were being published on toxicity, and especially DDT. And so she had access to all these publications, and it really supported her book that she put out. And I call it the wake-up call that what Carson did. Another guy that did a wake-up call, his name is Jerome Davio. Davio was an attorney from Waterville, Maine, and he really focused on the Kennebec and the Penobscot, the water power interest and the pollution interest, how it really shadowed what we needed to do for the future. And he was well ahead of his time. This book came out in 1958. And we saw lots of signs like this. I think I saw one on the wall in here that you have in one of the displays. All the clam flats along the coast were closed. I don't know of anything that was open at that time back in the 60s. Okay, the 10 most polluted rivers in the United States, the Androscoggin was one of them. And we had unregulated discharges in Maine. And I'll be showing you something about that. One farmer along the Androscoggin River, I quoted him on this, he lived up in the town of Leeds. In fact, he's Barry Moore's grandfather. And he said that, well, you can read it, okay? I thought it was quite neat what he had to say. And this was the Androscoggin River up at Gulf Island Pond. Dick Swayze, this gentleman just passed away in March. And we're doing a memorial service for Dick this month, in fact, the month of May. He was one of the pioneers for sampling. We all had to do sampling, and most of it was broken pipes and things didn't work and had to be put together. But this is what we had for water quality classification, to just give you a good idea of how bad things were. We had waters that were unclassified. You know what that meant then? It meant you could throw anything into the water you wanted to. That's just what it meant. And that's the legislature stood by that. And as a young biologist, I asked one of the legislators in Augusta back in the 1960s, around 62, when is this going to stop, or when are things going to be cleaned up? He said, Matt, when the water doesn't flow, we'll probably do something about it. And it got that bad. So these waters that you see that were pretty much in the organized towns dominated by there was really not very many people. So the problems of pollution are people. We know that worldwide. And the C classification, which is pretty bad, we had a few of the major working rivers, the Penobscot and the Kennebec. Down here we had this part of the Androscoggin that just couldn't meet classification. There were 17 paper mills on that river at one time. 17 paper mills. And the waste equivalent to that was the population of New York City, the BOD, or biological oxygen demand, that waste created. Okay.
Matt, just a sec, what year was that?
Oh, okay. That was around 1960. 1960. So what we're working on here, when I came to work in 1970, in fact, I came to work on Earth Day, I think it was, in 1970, the first Earth Day that we had. We had all this policy that was going to be driven, and all of them were taking place in this decade right here. The Environmental Improvement Commission was in 1970. It was Bill Adams. That was long before it became an agency, the DEP. But my job was to create this biological division and hire the right people to be able to do the job that was an enormous job to do. Here I was, like a token biologist, working with engineers and chemists. They were good. Those people were very knowledgeable, engineers and chemists. It helped me realize the diversity and knowledge that we need to do the job. Eventually we needed geologists and meteorologists and all sorts of knowledgeable people to do the job to clean up this bad situation that we had in the state of Maine. Then this became a department, and that was under Governor Curtis, and Bill Adams, he became the new commissioner for the department. Bill was an engineer, and he was very good. Probably, well, at that time, I'd have to say, and probably for the next 20 years, probably the best commissioner the department ever had, really. But we had algal blooms in our lakes, so our lakes weren't looking very good at all. They were looking, we had what we call the Dirty 30 in Maine, and Sebasticook and Sebatis and Anabescook and all these other green lakes were all part of the problem that we had. And I was overwhelmed by what we were going to have to do. So I focused on lake activities, and then Dave Courtemanch came to work for me after we were starting the lake project with Ron Davis. And David is going to focus on the benthos, the biological factors that we had to tie in with benthological organisms. But our lakes are so valuable that even today, I think that what Baxter said, that they're, I don't think that we can even measure the value of these waters today. We tried to do it with Steve Call and with Roy Bouchard and with, let's see, who else was involved in that from campus? Kevin Boyle. Kevin was involved in one of those projects. We tried to come up with numbers, but it's a moving target because the valuation of these properties increases annually. So there's never any end as to what they're worth, because everyone wants their piece of lake property, or everyone wants to own a lakeshore property in the state of Maine. So here's David right here, and this is Jeff Dennis right here. These are my two prime employees back in 1971 and 1972. The gentleman in the foreground is, well, I'm his age today. This gentleman's passed on. We climbed up Haystack Mountain that evening just to see the view and to take some pictures. And these are back in old 35 millimeter slide days, so I had to get these converted, of course. Dr. Gibbs came to Orono in 1972, and John Diamond introduced me to Cassie. And this is why I think it became important for this guy right here and Cassie Gibbs to start the aquatic entomology program here at the university. And it was really it was like an act of God happening, that Cassie came here to do this. And all the students that she's had, and many of them I hired, and other people David has hired since. So I give her full credit of starting the aquatic entomology program here on campus. When John Diamond introduced me to her, we were at Borden Hall, and Steve Norton was there, and we had what we call the Committee for the Advancement of Lake Studies, CALS. That was the nickname, or the acronym. And Steve's not here today, but by golly, he served as the chair. And we were trying to decide what would be the parameter that we could use and get volunteers involved, because Ron Davis thought, why not use volunteers? The Weather Service has been doing it for years. So it's kind of the beginning of the concept of citizen scientists. And this whole decade of environmental movement started, and with David and I and Jeff, we started getting more funding, and we hired people to do the job. So I call it the decade of environmental movement. All of these things happened in '69. This Policy Act was created, and it really affected the policy that was governing all of us throughout the country and what would happen in the future. DDT, Rachel Carson was talking about how bad these things were. DDT was commonly used in Maine. This happened to be on the side of a stream that I took the photograph from. It was over near Unity College, Marsh Stream. That's where this photo comes from. And in 1971, we developed a restriction. You could call it a ban, but DDT, as well as all the other chlorinated hydrocarbons from Maine, were listed as restricted compounds, no longer to be used. And EPA later followed. It became a national issue that these chlorinated hydrocarbons would be off the market and not used. However, I think a lot of them went into other undeveloped countries, and I don't know what impact it probably some of those compounds created. But this gentleman here, I met him through Bill Adams years ago, and Ed Muskie was, well, just what it says right there. He became the national hero. And he shepherded the Clean Air Act as well as the Clean Water Act. And it was really controversial. President Nixon at that time vetoed the act, but he saw that Congress was going to override him, and so he broke down and he signed the act, and it was a big celebration, a big issue. So with David and Jeff in 1975, we created another organization called the New England Association of Environmental Biologists. We had to do this because we needed to know jointly with other states what they were going to do. Were we going to use biological standards? How were we going to develop them? It was going to take time to do that. And we all put our heads together and we worked together as a New England unit there for a long time, and finally we got into what was called a EPT ratio. That was the biological standard that was going to be developed. Now those are 3 great orders of insects, thanks to Cassie's teaching in teaching what all these critters were. But what we wanted to do is develop biodiversity and integrity of what we could use these bottom organisms for, to put biological standards into law along with the narratives that had to be developed. So both things were taking place at the same time. And these are some of the historical people that are in here. Some of these people are all retired. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This guy is the only one of the group that's still working. He's Nick Archer. He's up in the Presque Isle office. But those are some of the early workers. And this is more recent with Don Witherell and David. David's still doing work, of course. And the NEABS years were very important for David and I to help get these things started. We talked to foresters. We talked to people that had to do sampling. We talked about reclass and what was going to be done on the reclassification hearings held by the DEP. The last one that I held was in 1988, and a retirement after that, and then I went into a long other career of activities. And finally, I finally finished a master's degree up here in '93. It took an awful long time to do that while I was working. Here again are the paper mills that I talked to you about. They were the bread and butter for many people in the state of Maine, but they had to comply. And these other sources that I mentioned earlier, from tanneries down through textiles and all of these other places, canneries. You mentioned the name of an organization that probably existed in Maine, and there was some kind of production somewhere. So the industry had to match what the municipal waste had to do. All the communities had to comply. They were provided with really good funding back then through EPA, and the treatment had to be a minimum of secondary. Only two towns that had to have tertiary was Moosehead and Rangeley at that time because of the discharges into those lakes. Now the biodiversity program was well underway now with Leon and Susan and David. And we were in the process of getting those standards done, and I had to go to Washington to meet with the senator on a number of funding issues. It was really important that the amendments now we're talking about to the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, not the acts themselves, but the amendments that came along. And this is George again with this. Okay. That's my wife. This is the president of the North American Lake Management Society. We were negotiating fundings with George's staff at that time in Washington. Okay, then I moved on to, Bucky's not here, but there's my boss right there. That's the moose hunt. I was hoping he'd be here today to see this slide. Jerry Longcourt and Bucky and I went on this moose hunt, but Bucky hired me, and the Edwards Dam was the big thing during the King administration, when Bucky served as commissioner under. And that dam is long gone now, and the biodiversity in that river has changed dramatically from Augusta all the way to Waterville. My term on this board was really interesting. In the 8.5 years that I spent on the board, with all the decisions regarding the process that David and his staff brought to the board, here I was, a former employee of the DEP. Now I was the decision maker on the Board of Environmental Protection. So it was I liked the fact that I saw all my staff coming back to the board to make presentations. And they did an excellent job, and we passed a lot of issues that went into making better standards for environmental protection in the state of Maine. And the regional greenhouse gas issue was one of the largest ones, I think, for Maine that we had. We dealt with windmills. We dealt with those, and we dealt with the closure of Maine Yankee and the ultrachemical in the Penobscot on mercury. So the growth within the state when I came to work was about 600,000 people, maybe a few less. And by 1990 into 2000, it was about 1.3, 1.4 million people. So Maine has grown. And what's going to look like? Well, Charlie Cogan's doing some work down at USM, and we figure by the year 2020, that's 2020, that growth is going to be primarily along the 95 corridor and some up in Aroostook County. But you can see that he's predicting that maybe we're going to approach the 2 million mark on people in the state of Maine, which is kind of interesting that that's the growth in people. There are people that are coming to Maine to retire now. So I go to Florida for the winter now for a few months, but the growth rate down there is 326 people per day. Square that, that's a lot of people in 1 year. All right, now climate change is with us, and this is some of the adaptation I think some of us are going to have to go through. Being an ice fisherman, I'm probably going to face that. David Courtemanch is going to be in there with us still, and we came up with this set of standards. This slide is very busy in my opinion. So what I did is I broke it down like this, David. I broke it down into 3 slides. That one you saw in 1970, then this one here in 1990, how we were improving water quality, did away with the unclassified waters and the D waters. Those got gutted out of the law. And then John Martin was involved with me with a project up in Aroostook County, right up in this area called Bald Mountain, which is an ore product for copper, probably gold as well. And we were concerned about the discharges from any kind of an open pit mine up there. And so I talked with John about it, and I said, what are we going to do? Can we get the legislature to think about putting on a better classification system? Now, maybe all of these won't match the integrity of the water that is, but we ought to put a policy in place where we'll be protecting these waters for the future. So he agreed to that. Now John wants mining. He's changed his whole idea about mining in Aroostook County. But we got these established, so what we did is 1990 we reclassified. That was 88. I was doing the classification in 88, but we got the standard set for 1990, Dave. Then on to 2015, this is really the working map of what the state looks like with water quality protection now. Much better than it did way back in these days. A significant improvement. And it's all based on biological standards, which I think is great. That's the old one there. There we go. Okay. Now, this here is a map of showing how some of these streams are going to need more monitoring to match the integrity of the class that's assigned to the water. And that's ongoing with Leon and other staff in the DEP. So I put this on for the future of what we probably going to be faced. And I think that what the students here can expect, I don't think we want to go backwards, okay? I think by treading backwards or treading water at all, so to speak, will jeopardize what we've accomplished. And I think that David and the rest of us, wouldn't like that. We're connected globally now with all these kinds of activities, and I think that the present thing that I'm going to be faced with is doing historical talks. Present water quality is swimmable and fishable. And if it's fishable, we think they should be edible. If you catch a fish, you ought to be able to eat it. So that's going to be very important. At times I've had these experts all together in one room and to talk about issues. This happens to be down at University of Maine Machias when I got them all together to talk about long-range transport, acid rain, atmospheric deposition, and Atlantic salmon. And if we have leaders like this in the future, I think we'll be well off. We'll be doing well and to maintain the environment. This is what I say here. I say our history of polluting our environment, causing great harm, are events I'm not so proud of, and I'm not, because it takes great steps to clean things up and to make them and sustain them, and we just can't go backwards because of, this is the future right here, and sustainability are us. We are the ones that's going to have to create and keep sustainability. I think you can read this slide. I think the biggest point I'd like to make here is the decisions have to be good and solid science-based as well. That's it. Aaron, good to see you.